As you'll no doubt be aware, the government is consulting on proposals to introduce a deposit return scheme for single-use drinks containers, and there are various options, such as the all-in model or on-the-go model. Mr. Fielding, which of the government's options for a deposit return scheme would your organisation prefer, and why?
I think we start off by being somewhat reluctant on the case for a deposit return scheme. Our preference actually would be to delay implementation until we've understood the impacts of EPR. Having said that, if one were to be implemented, then I think we would be advocating an on-the-go system as opposed to an all-in.
And why is that?
An all-in system, as the name, as the definition applies, would cover every drinks container. This would fundamentally undermine the effectiveness and efficiency of local government collection systems for what we believe is quite limited benefit. The case for a DRS within the government's consultation seems to be predicated on largely on litter and avoiding litter. And there is an awful lot of reliance put on some fairly unproven analysis on the amenity value of litter. And I think government themselves have recognised there is a need to do a lot more work on this. So we don't believe that they've actually effectively proven the business case for a DRS. If a DRS is going to be rolled out and implemented, it doesn't seem sensible to include those materials that are not prevalent in litter to any large degree. And an on-the-go system would seem to be more appropriate, because when we talk about litter, we're not talking about just what's picked up from a litter collection. It's the recyclables within the litter bins, which typically is very hard to recycle and often isn't recycled and go off for disposal. So if we can target those materials, which tend to be smaller and typically plastic or can containers, then I can see some potential value in doing that. But it doesn't seem to make sense to include wine bottles, for example, which make up I would hazard a guess that somewhere around 50%, Lee might have better numbers, but a big proportion of local authority collection systems, to have them returned to shops or other deposit return scheme take-back places when they can be efficiently collected and effectively collected through local authority systems.
Ms. Baden, what's your thoughts? What are your thoughts in terms of which of these options are preferable, and also perhaps you could answer whether you think there are financial risks, and what are the financial risks to local authorities of a DRS scheme?
Okay, so it's sort of slightly at odds. We looked at it as a trade body in terms of ease of customer and confusion. So if you had an on-the-go and an all-in, what's the confusion from the consumer's point of view? And that's really, again, a bit about consistency. Where do I put what material and why do I have to put it there? And that confusing message. So our preference is if a DRS is introduced, we wouldn't be advocating it should be at this moment in time, is it's an all-in system to avoid the confusion for the consumer. Right. They need to know where to take that material. Now there is, and whether you do all-in or DRS, there'll be leakage in the system, because we're all creatures of habit. We go for the easiest system, what's most convenient to us at that point in day and time. So it would need to be covered in terms of financial risk, cost, leakage or performance through whichever system, that it's either DRS, it's caught in there, all in or on the go, and EPR funding. You can't just assume just because it's covered under DRS it isn't going to leak back into a local authority system.
Okay,
Mr. Marshall, people are creatures of habit.
Yeah. Mr. Marshall, I noted that obviously your organisation has called for this scheme to be deferred. But would you be, if the scheme is to be implemented, which of the two options would you prefer?
Yeah, I mean, we call for a deferral as well, because we feel there's more research needs doing, and that was actually one of the recommendations of the government's own voluntary rewards panel was to defer. If it had to come down to it and one was introduced, we think on the go. But to say we think deferral is better, because the EPR and the consistency policy changes could bring, are quite big and could bring about improvements in recycling. So let's see how they work. Let's get those bedded. And when we can see what that performance realises, if something needs doing, DRS can be laid on top. We don't advocate an all-in because we think it's going to cannibalise the curbside system. So we were part of a group that contributed to a modelling tool for local authorities that they could use to assess the impacts of DRS on them. And one county council area in the south of England, all the district councils used this tool, and their average recycling rate under an all-in DRS went down by 3.98%. So a DRS would have to bring that back just to get even before it did increases. And in terms of financial risks, the feedback we got, albeit a small sample size, we will admit, local authorities were reporting on average £126,000 increase in their costs under an all-in DRS, which if you scale up across England is £44 million. So that's £44 million cost producers would incur before they incurred the cost of the DRS itself.
From your the London Waste and Recycling Board submission that you asked for greater clarification on this whole process, but which of the two schemes, if they were implemented, would you prefer? And also, could you highlight from your perspective what are the financial risks to local authorities?
Again, we agree that there should be a very careful consideration and close relationship between the EPR and the DRS, and it's how they're rolled out and how they're implemented should be sort of looked at quite closely, and how they would work with each other. However, if there were a DRS scheme, we've opted for an all-in. We think that there would be less confusion. We do recognise that there would be quite some detrimental financial risks for local authorities. But we do feel that maybe because of the least confusion, that would be essentially a better option. I think some of the financial risks that we've looked at are things like the higher quality materials possibly going into the DRS machine, into the DRS deposit points rather than under the curbside, which would generally make a lot of the collections less efficient, possibly vehicles carrying less materials, still having to go to each of the properties, but not collecting as much. Possibly some sort of people looking through bins and trying to sort of get good quality materials out to get deposits back from some of the reverse vending machines and this sort of thing. However, we're still unclear on potentially if local authorities were involved in the collection of some of the DRS material. I'm not really clear, or we're not really clear exactly how that would work and who the material would belong to once it's been recovered from the DRS system. Would some of that go back to local authorities? Would they then be able to recognise that within their recycling targets? So that could be a potential. That could be a potential benefit for local authorities, but that's still unclear exactly how that would work.
Okay. I mean, setting aside the lack of clarity from the government, would you say that any loss of income to local authorities would be offset by operational efficiencies?
I think not, no, because I think actually the operational efficiencies may decrease. As I say, the vehicles still have to go to every single household, so if they're collecting less material or less quality material, so I think it would actually make the system less efficient. It might be harder for local authorities to get good contracts if they're not picking up very good quality material. So there is a big risk to local authorities. It's just difficult to know exactly how that will pan out. Will people still continue to place good quality materials into their curbside bins? Because essentially, if they're on the go, they would at the moment possibly tend to put them in a litter bin anyway rather than take them home with them. So it's actually difficult to know if that good quality material would come out of the curbside or not until the scheme is in place.
Okay. Ms. Patton, you were shaking your head there. Do you think that any loss of income would be offset by operational efficiencies?
No.
I'm assuming not yet. Okay.
A few of the authorities and members we've talked to, and they've done some of their own modelling, can actually see a cost still there. Because this whole DRS thing is sort of being pushed by the litter amenity value issue, and it's not still there, you've still got to go out, you've still got to go and clean the streets, you've still got to go and send people out, and those costs will still be in the system, and there's no ability to offset that.
Okay, Mr. Fielding, along with comments on that, would you say that disposal authorities and collection authorities are affected in different ways?
They will be. They will be. One of the comments I forgot to mention in the earlier response, I just wanted the opportunity to make, is in relation to particularly rural areas under a DRS. The government recognised in the consultation they don't really know how this is going to work in a rural area, and representing my authority is a rural area. We don't know. We wait to see what happens in Scotland, and that's very interesting. But I can't get my head around how particularly an all-in DRS scheme will work in a rural area where there isn't the infrastructure there to enable people to take back all their containers. I think when the technology exists, and it doesn't exist as far as I'm aware yet, but when the technology exists to be able to record at the household level when you put your container into your curbside collection system, your bin or your box, and to have that credited to you, then I can see an all-in DRS system being very effective at encouraging that sort of behaviour. But until we get to that point, I'm not quite sure how it will work.
Okay.
And that is a concern. Your point about will disposal and collection authorities be affected differently by a DRS, I presume you mean. Yes, they very much will, because as a disposal authority, and I work for a disposal authority, we don't get involved in curbside collections. Our obligations are to pay collection authorities recycling credits where they recycle from the curbside. So anything taken out of a curbside collection system will reduce local authority, collection authority income, and be beneficial to a waste disposal authority. I'm not saying that's beneficial to society as a whole, the taxpayer as a whole, it probably won't be. But it would be beneficial to the waste disposal authority, and that's one of the sort of perverse issues around two-tier working.
Okay.